see my screen?
We can see.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. So again, like this is the third session on our platform architecture. So we also have remaining runtime fabric that we will do in next session. Today we will focus on uh, hybrid implementation and the on-premises implementation of your Mule runtime. So I will start with the safe harbor statement. Both speaker and host are organizing this meetup in the individual capacity. We are not representing any organization or company here. The presentation is strictly for learning purpose. We are not holding any responsibility whether the same solution or whether the same platform setup will work for your business requirement or not. Like there might be some tweaking needed. So the presentation is not meant for any promotional activity. It is just for the learning purpose. We will going to upload the recording of this meeting on the event page within 24 hours, and I will going to share the link for the same. You can submit the question at any time. Generally try to just enable your mic and just ask the question, right? Also, like we are not getting much feedback, but I will encourage everyone to provide the feedback for the session. At the end of the session, you will be receiving the email where you can just click on the link and just provide the feedback. It will take 1 or 2 minutes, not more than that. I will just skip this. So let's start with on-premises Mule runtime. So what do you understand like by on-premises, on-premises Mule runtime? Like anyone like want to put some highlight on that?
Yes, Jitendra. Actually, if a client wants to put their whole application in their network, so that time they will go for on-premise and they can deploy the application in their network. So in the internally they can access and they can use, but externally it cannot be used in internet.
But we can do, yeah, that is true. But even we are deploying on the on-premises, we can definitely use it externally by connecting the external load balancer right on the top of the application. So like
Yes.
anybody who want to access your application publicly, it is possible to do that, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Devasis. Let me start. So the on-premises means like you are setting up your Mule runtime. You are installing a Mule runtime inside your company's own data center or the corporate data center, or maybe on your own cloud like AWS cloud or Azure cloud, right? So if you want to set up your Mule runtime on the cloud, within your data center or on the Azure data center or like AWS data center, you can choose a Mule runtime. So we can call this as a on-premises Mule runtime, or we can call this as a customer hosted Mule runtime, basically, right? So in this case, like MuleSoft will be not responsible for managing any infrastructure, right? So it is your responsibility, like to manage the infrastructure, or it is the responsibility of the cloud provider to manage the infrastructure, right? It will be not MuleSoft responsibility, right? You manage the server, you control everything like hardware, operating system, network security, and all non-functional requirement high availability, resiliency, fault tolerance. All this has to be managed by you, right? Auto scaling, everything has to be taken care by you, right? So basically nothing will run on the MuleSoft cloud. Everything will be hosted on your corporate data center, on your private network, or maybe on some uh, private cloud, like maybe on private cloud like AWS, or maybe on public cloud, basically, right? But it will be on not, you are not deploying a MuleSoft application on the Anypoint platform Cloud Hub or Cloud Hub 2.0. It will be whole your responsibility, right? Like for example, if your company has its own servers, right, in the server room or data center, you can install the Mule runtime on those servers. So that is nothing on premises Mule runtime. We also call as a customer hosted Mule runtime. Why company choose the on premises, right? So there might be security requirement. Like there are organization, there are various domains like healthcare or like banking, where like your data should not move to the cloud, and the organization have some strict regulations and rule where they don't want their data goes out of the network, right? In that case, you can go with the on premises Mule runtime. yeah, sensitive data cannot go to the cloud, right? And like, in the banking domain, like you have a lot of transactions flowing, like, a lot of money transfers happens, right? So in such cases, like you want to make sure everything happen within your network, then in that case you can go with a on-premise or customer hosted mule runtime. I already mentioned about regulatory compliance, and you already have a data center, like, like you are or all the application within your organization running within your data center, and you don't want to move to the cloud, right? You already invested high amount in your corporate data center. In such cases, you can go with a mule runtime. There are real like example can be bank does not want the customer transaction data to leave its internal network, which I already discussed. So in such cases, you can hosted a mule runtime on your corporate data center, right? If you want to integrate with some like a core banking system, right? So in such cases, like you want to make sure when I integrate with core banking system, like I don't want to connect via public network, like those core banking system or like are very important, right? It contain a lot of customers data, it contain all the customer account information or the transactions balance information. You don't want those information goes out. Like I'm not saying like if you are banking, you don't want to, you cannot use the cloud. You can, like in some of the cases, there are banks where, or there are other domains where they have some compliance and regulatory requirement, or in some countries there are some regulatory requirement, right? Like in such cases, if you want to fulfill that regulatory requirement or compliance requirement, then in that case you can go with on-premises mule runtime. Any question? Question. Okay. Now I will ask one question, like, what is a hybrid mule runtime? Anybody can put some highlight on that. What is hybrid mule runtime? Let me on the presented mode. Just give me a second. Anybody have any idea on hybrid mule runtime?
Yes, Jitendra. Hybrid means this means Anypoint platform, it is belongs to control by MuleSoft, and this application deployed, it is in the client network. So in that case, it is means this runtime manager, it is means used by the client. So that is called a hybrid.
Yeah, that is a correct answer. Okay, so basically in hybrid mule runtime, what happen? Your runtime plane will exist on your on-premises or customer hosted data center, whereas like your control plane will be located in your Anypoint platform, basically, right? So what are the things comes into the control plane, like your API manager, Anypoint monitoring, runtime manager, those kind of things will become as a part of your control plane, basically. But your mule runtime will be the part of your runtime plane, which will be located on premises. Like these are very important concept. If you are going for platform architect exam, you need to know all this concept, right? What this control plane, what is this runtime plane, right? So these are the important concept. I'm just enabling my, so like, if anybody have any question, they can ask me at any time. Okay, just I will stop here, like I will go back to my presentation. Okay, so this is very important, and most of the customer, if they are choosing on premises, they go with this kind of architecture. So now question, now like in that case, how are you going to fulfill the compliance requirement, so what happen if you are implementing the hybrid mule runtime, right? Your data will never go out of your data center, right? It will be within your network only, right? Only the metadata will be sent to the control plane or to the Anypoint platform, basically, right? But the data will be not going, will be not go out of your network, basically, right? So this is a typical how the hybrid mule runtime looks like. So hybrid means your mule runtime running on your on-premises system or your custom hosted environment, but it is completely managed from MuleSoft Cloud. So if you want to apply the policy for API running on your on-premises, then you can apply it from the Anypoint platform, basically, right? If you want to deploy your application, right, so you can do it from the runtime manager. So you can select your, you go to runtime manager, just say deploy application, and choose the target as your on-premises. Then just select jar file, and it will going to deploy your application to your on-premises environment, basically, right? You can apply the policies, you can check your application monitoring and all those things, which will be available on your Anypoint platform, basically, right? So think of like that, like a mule runtime is inside your house, whereas remote control is in the cloud. Basically, you can control everything from the Anypoint platform, right? But it doesn't mean your data will go outside your or your network. It will be reside in your on-premises network. Only the metadata will flow. Like for example, like if I want to see my application name on, like what are the application deployed into the my on-premises runtime, right? So you can see the application name and what are the metadata related to that particular application. Where is your application deployed, on which on-premise server the application is deployed, those kind of information, right? And whenever, like, it also sends some kind of monitoring data to the Anypoint platform, right? And also, like, your whenever you deploy your application on your on-premises basically, and you want to apply the API policies, right? So there's a two, like there's a one of the best way you can go with the API auto discovery, right? So you can, whatever API auto discovery you enable for deploying the application to the cloud, of same way you can enable the API auto discovery for the application deployed to the on-premises basically, right? So it's the same thing, like you have to provide that API ID, client ID, and the client secret, and like it will be automatically connect to the API manager instance. And once you restart or once you apply the policy will be automatically downloaded to your application basically within your on-premises Mule runtime. It will automatically get applied basically, right? So this is what happens in very some of the important concept. So it's very important to know the difference between control plane versus runtime plane. So what are the things falls into the control plane? So one of the thing, the control plane is completely managed by MuleSoft. You don't have to worry about that, like so it is completely hosted by MuleSoft. Anypoint platform UI is a part of control plane. Anypoint monitoring, API manager, runtime manager, alerts, and analytics, these are all the part of your control plane in case of hybrid architecture. Runtime plane is nothing like, it's a Mule servers which is running your own data center, your application which executed in your runtime plane, or your data which stays within your network. That's all fall under the runtime plane basically. Okay, this is how typical the architecture looks like. You have a control plane which located in your Anypoint control plane located in the Anypoint platform, and this is your runtime plane which is located in the data center, right? This API designer, API manager, API Anypoint exchange cloud of all part of control plane basically, right? Only the Mule runtime application and whatever data flows, that will be the part of your runtime plane basically, right? Yeah. And like when you set up such kind of architecture, you are responsible for setting up all the firewall rules and everything, like how you can connect to the application over the internet, how you can connect to the private application from your Mule runtime. That let all the firewall rules and everything has to be taken care by you basically. It will be not MuleSoft responsibility. Okay, any question before I move ahead into next? Yeah, anybody have any question?
And Jitendra, how this link it will happen from this means runtime manager? How the application it is deployed in the means on-premise? How this link means
I,
only API ID is the thing, or how it will be linked?
so you are talking about API manager instance?
API means API manager. It is there in the means Mule hosted AWS, and this runtime manager it is an on-premise. So how this means linkage it will happen? So I have.
Okay, 1 minute. I will come on that. Okay. So like for example, like it's very simple basically, right? So I will open the notepad. And, okay, I will give a simple example where, like for example, you have application deployed to Mule runtime, which is hosted on premise, right? And you want to connect with the API manager. That's what you are saying, right?
Yes, API means API manager. It is in the MuleSoft
Yeah, I got
hosted
it.
server.
It's a
So
control
how?
plane, right?
Yes, yes,
So whenever you deploy the application, right? So like first thing you have to create the API instance. The step one. I will take step by step by. Create. So you will develop YAML and everything. Then you create API instance. Okay, with basic
yes,
endpoint. That's a first step. Okay. So this
yes,
is nothing. This is API auto discovery.
yes,
Now it will give you instance ID, right? API instance ID.
yes,
Now you have a MuleSoft. Step 2. So configure that API ID, okay, in Mule application. Okay, so you have or API auto discovery component where you can configure the API ID and provide main flow. That is the component available in global. You can do it global.xml, right?
Yeah, yes,
And provide API auto discovery, provide API and provide main flow, right? So that's what you
yes,
do. API get router flow. Step
yes,
3, you have to pass two properties: anypoint dot platform dot client ID, anypoint dot platform dot client secret. Okay, these are the two property. So from where you can get this? So if you go to the API manager, this will be per environment basically. Okay, so under API manager, you can go to the environment where you want to do that, and click environment, and you get this client. Where is the, yeah, environment client ID in the client secret. You have to pass those two property, or you have to pass this, or say simple thing like, if you go in on-premise, right, you just configure this property in the wrapper.conf. Okay, so there is a file wrapper.conf in under the configuration under the Mule runtime, right? When you deploy the Mule runtime on premises, basically, right? So there is a wrapper.config file. You will see this property there, right? Just you will see this property like this, has, or it is commented out. Just remove this, okay, and just add that client ID and the client secret which you get it from there. So so you do that. So whenever you deploy, now you will deploy your application basically, right? Now whenever you deploy the application, right, it will automatically connect to your API instance basically. Okay, but condition, make sure there are, if you go to MuleSoft documentation, so there are some firewall rules. You need to keep it open basically. You need to there are some URLs, right? So like, to connect to Anypoint platform, so the connectivity between Anypoint platform and your Mule runtime is there. So there are 2-3 URL which you need to make sure open on your firewall basically. Is this answer your question?
yes, yes, right.
Okay, cool. So we know, like, there are two important concepts when we deploy our MuleSoft when we set up a Mule runtime basically on your on premises. So there are two important concepts: clustering and the server group. Anybody heard about clustering in the server group?
Generally, clustering is nothing but like we need to run the application in two replicas, right, Jitendra? Like in order,
Yeah.
it will increase the vCore size.
Okay. So like server group is also doing same thing and clustering is also doing same thing, but there are difference. I'm going to explain those. So clustering is nothing. It's a group of server, or it's a group of Mule runtime that act as a single unit that works together basically, right? So with clustering, what you can achieve? With clustering, I can achieve high availability. So basically, in case of if one server goes down in the cluster, the other server will start processing the request, or in like, so that is how it's happening. So also it can be used for like distributing the traffic across the multiple servers or multiple nodes, and also it shared the state. For example, if your application is using some kind of object stores and VMQ, and you want to make sure that they both application, like, like whatever object store used by both application, right, it should be shared basically. Even if they are using the VMQ, it should be the shared basically, right? If you are not using the clustering, right, those kind of object store and VMQs will be not shared across the application. So what will happen, each application have its own object store and it will be out of the sync basically. In case of clustering, it automatically take off synchronization of object stores and like shared queues, and like it generally, like, it use the distributed shared memory, right? So that particular memory is using the Hazelcast in the backend basically. Hazelcast is some kind of distributed grid, right? So that is where it store all the object store shared queues, and which can be shared by the multiple nodes in the cluster basically, right? So in this case, what will happen, each node will have a like will have a access to the up to date object store, like say like queue, like VMQs and session data basically, right? So that is one of the benefit of the clustering. So what is a cluster node? Cluster node is nothing. It's a Mule runtime, or we can call this as a or we can call this a Mule runtime running on the some server basically, or some virtual machine basically, right? that is nothing as cluster node. Each node runs the same application but can process the message independently. Okay. A distributed shared memory, I already talked about that. So node in the cluster communicate using the distributed memory gift. It uses the Hazelcast, right? And like it is very important to have a distributed memory gift. Like you have to go with the clustering. Like whenever your application is using the object store VM queues, or it also shared the state across the multiple mule multiple servers basically, right? So all nodes are synchronized. So for example, I have a 4 servers, and one of the node goes down, the 3 servers will immediately get the information this particular server is gone down. So this server is not there basically. As soon as this server will come up, the other node will also come to know like this server is up. Now it's a part of the cluster basically. Load balancing and the failover. So basically, in case of like clustering, also we need some kind of third-party load balancer for distributing the HTTP traffic. So if the traffic is coming out from the outside and you want to distribute across the multiple nodes, then we need some kind of external load balancer or NGINX or any other load balancer, elastic load balancer. We need it basically. But there's one of the thing like what happened like I have a 4 node and my application received the message and it start processing a message. In middle of that, something goes fails. One of the node gone down basically. In that case, the remaining processing will be done by other node in the cluster basically, right? It will ensure that the whatever message like message has been not completely processed, it will be taken care by the other nodes in the cluster. So there's a one setting we need to do to achieve this. Basically, we have to use the VM queues, otherwise it doesn't happen basically. So I will going to talk on that going forward. Right, communication like cluster node must have a reliable network connectivity. Typically, they need certain ports to be open, 5701 and 5703. Cluster should stay within the same LAN or same data center. So basically, whenever you are deploying servers in the whenever you are deploying or whenever you are adding servers into the cluster, make sure they are within the same network, right? They all are running the same mule runtime, right? So all the configuration on all the servers within the cluster have identical. Okay. Now I have one question, like if anybody can answer this question, it will be good. So for example, I have a 4 servers in one cluster, right? And on each server I have deployed three application, right? Now due to some like some traffic issue or like due to like getting the heavy traffic, I added the 5th server in the cluster. What will happen to that existing application? Will that existing application automatically deployed to the 5th server, or we have to manually deploy it, or we have to use some CI/CD pipeline to deploy everything on the 5th server basically? Anybody can answer this question? This is very important question. This is very good question. Like, you got my question, right? What I'm trying to say. Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I think it should be auto deployed if it is server clustered, right?
Yes, correct. So as soon as like if you have like 10 application deployed on the previous servers, right, or old servers or like existing servers basically, then whenever you add the new servers to the cluster, all application will automatically get deployed to that particular 5th servers in the cluster basically. This happens automatically. So you don't have to worry about those parts. Okay, key benefits: high availability. As I mentioned, like for HTTP traffic, we need external load balancer. Then for internal, for internal load balancing, we need a VM queues, right? As I mentioned, like in case of if some message got failed, like or server goes down while processing the message, right? Then the message will automatically transfer to the other available servers, basically, right? So this happens to the VM queues, basically. Without VM queue, it cannot be achieved. Scalability, you can add up to 8 servers basically into one cluster basically, right? Single control plane, like you can manage everything using Anypoint runtime manager. So in Anypoint, you can deploy the application to the on-premises using like to the cluster using Anypoint runtime manager. You need to register the servers like on your runtime managers, all those kind of things. I will going to share. I have a complete demos on that. I'm going to share the video like at the end of the session. You can go through that basically. Everything has been explained. Okay. Then as I mentioned, like if you are using some like object store in the queues, right? So it will be shared across the multiple multiple servers within the cluster, right? So these are the few key benefits. So for example, this is one of the example. Client send the request, right? So like my request will, like 1 and 2 request is processed by node 1 and the node 2. There are 3 and 4 requests is also coming. Node 2 goes down. So what will happen? My request, the the second request processing by node 2 will be transferred to the node 1 basically, like that, you know. So this ensure the, like, you know, high availability and fault tolerance architecture. For example, like how it happened. So I received the order, right? So for processing the order, I have few steps, like, you know, receive order, process order, discount, and fulfill the order. So there are 2 node cluster. So I received the order, I process the order from the node 1 and order fulfilled by the node 2 basically. So what happens? So here how this happen, right? So when I receive the orders, I process the orders, then I put into the request response VM queues basically, right? So now, like, I put into the VM queues basically, that particular, once I receive the order, then I put into the VM queues. The process order discount on the node 1 will read the message from the VM queues, right? And like again, after doing this processing, it put the message into a request response VM queue basically. Then like fulfill, or the node 2 has message from the VM queue, and it fulfill the processing basically. It will just send the response back, right? So you can use the VM queue to distribute the load across the multiple, or if you want to process the same message across the multiple nodes basically, right? That is where we have to follow that architecture. Yeah, this is one of the good example. I received the message, right? No, so my node 1 is available, it is lesser busy, it picked that message. Now it haven't completed the processing, like in between, like it sent the message to the VM queue now, right? So node 2 is available, it picked the message from VM queues, right? Then like another processing is done by node 4, and the final done by the node 3. It might be possible everything done by the single node also. It can be done by 2 nodes also. Like if you are not using the VM queue, then it will be processed by everything by 1 basically, right? So if node 1 received, so the whole message will process by node 1. But if you want to achieve some kind of zero message loss or guarantee message processing, you can use this kind of architecture. Okay, so there's a one more thing, primary node difference basically. So like I will tell you one of the thing basically. Before that, I want to explain you one concept. So I have a 2 node cluster. Okay, I have deploy application on cluster that having topic. Okay, so it means, so both the 2 instances of application deployed to the both the nodes basically, right? So one instance to both the node of the same application. So the topic, right? The topic is listening to the, you know, say on the both the nodes basically, right? So now I send the message to queue or to topic. What will happen here? Can anybody tell me how this message will get processed? It will process by one topic, or it will process by both the topic?
One topic.
Okay. Any other guess?
Well, it will be processed by both, I believe.
Yeah, you are correct. So it will be requested by both. The same message will be requested by both. Okay. See, we are even using the clustering, but the message is processed by both the topic. So it means the processing happening. The same message has been processed for the 2 times. This is not good, right? Okay. But clustering has provided one setting that you can do. So here you can see in active model, all nodes are able to perform processing. However, one of the node act as a primary. So in cluster, if you have a 4 server or 4 node, like 4 server, one of them will be acting as a primary node. Okay, so always the scheduler will run on the primary node, right? Event sources mark as a primary node only, right? So I will talk on that. So like this model enables you to configure the sources to run on the single and the primary polling. So what happened? So in connector, you can do one of the setting, like, you know, primary node only equals to true. For in the case of topic, if you want to process the message by 1, right? So you can just make sure the primary node only property is true on the connector level, right? Once you've done that, what will happen? So for example, my cluster 1 is it's primary. my cluster 2 is non-primary. So if I enable my setting as a primary node only, so the message from topic will be processed by primary node. Okay, so in case of scheduler always run on primary node. But in case if you want to do the load balancing, you can use the VM queue. First, schedule will run on the primary node, right? But if you want to load balance the message in the flows, you can use the VM queues. You have to do the application design change. So for clustering, you have to make sure, like, you have to take care of some design change of your applications, basically. Right now, my question: what will happen in case of cluster 1 goes down? Any guess?
Primary will consume it.
Cluster 2 will consume it.
Yeah, the cluster 2 will become primary. Then all the processing will be done by cluster 2. Okay, that's how it happens.
Just one question here. How we can find that logs on this particular part? Which particular cluster is active and which data is kept by each cluster? How this is possible
So
is
here it's very simple. It's everything you can see in the runtime manager, basically. So you go to runtime
uh,
manager. Okay, I will come on that. You can see the CPU uses and everything. Under runtime manager, you go to servers. Right here, you have to create a cluster, like groups and everything. Right, first you need to add the register servers and everything. Right, so then you create a group. So for registering server, you need to go and run this command on your on-premises, basically. Then you will see your server get registered here, basically. It will show status and everything. Same thing goes with the create group. What are the servers under that group? You will see it here, right? Then also, like, similar thing will go with the cluster. Right now, once you add the servers here, right, you will see some kind of analytics, CPU uses, like, memory uses, and everything will be visible here, basically. You can now, other thing, you can also deploy our application from here itself. Like, you just say deploy application, just select the target. Here it's a cloud up, so you will see the hybrid, right? So once you create a cluster or servers, it will be visible here. Just select, and it will going to deploy application to your on-premises, basically. Right, I will going to share the videos on that. I have a lot of things available. If you can go through that, right, you will get a lot of idea on that, basically.
okay. Thank you.
Is this concept clear, right? This primary node one. Okay, now next question.
And one thing, Jitendra, as you inform, if primary got down, so secondary will be the primary. So if scheduler is running in primary and it is down, so scheduler will directly move to secondary.
Yeah, secondary it will be moved to secondary, will become primary, right?
Okay.
So now even cluster 1 comes up, right? The cluster does, okay, the server, I will not say server, it's a server. Okay, so now, for example, server comes up, right? The server 2 will still remain primary now, basically, right? So, like, till server 2 doesn't goes down, right? So, like, once server 2 goes down, it become primary, and it will stay primary, basically. That's how it happens. Yeah, any question?
Like basically, it's auto configurable, right? We can't control it.
Yeah, it's auto in the sense, like, can you just
Like you told, right? Like primary, when
yeah, it
primary.
automatically, you don't, like, you cannot say, like, this is primary or this secondary. It automatically happens. It automatically do switching and everything.
No.
Okay, now my other question: can I create a distributed grid on some external system? That shared memory which I talk about, right? Hazelcast, we have it, right? Can I do that? Like, can I create some kind of persistent store, basically? Currently it's in memory, basically. In case of, like, if I restart or something got crashed, so all data will be lost, basically, right? Can I have some kind of persistent storage? Anyone? Okay, so you can use the SQL database for that. So there are some while creating the creating that cluster, right? So you have to create some config file, like like on, you have to save it on the Mule runtime, where you have to provide the SQL connection string and like username, password, and let's use just have to tell like SQL as my date, my memory or in persistent storage. Then in that case, like all your VMQs, object store, everything will be available on like on the SQL database. In case application goes down, your data will be not lost. I will going to provide the videos on that, how we can configure that. So there are things available on that basically. Okay, so there is a way. If somebody asks, I want to create a persistent storage, persistent data grid or persistent, right? In that case, you can use like Postgres SQL is there. There's a one more SQL database that can be used. Okay, this is how typical the architecture looks like in clustering basically. So I have a node 1, node 2, node 3, node 4 in the non-production environment. Then I have 4 nodes in the production environment, which is behind firewall, which is in my corporate data center. And as I mentioned, like whatever node you are configuring here, it will be going to visible in your runtime manager, node 1, node 2, node 3, node 4, node 1, and this is Anypoint clustering. Then you will create a cluster. Under that cluster, you will just going to map this 4 nodes basically. The clustering can be of two type, multicast and the unicast. I will going to talk on that. Right, then you need some kind of external load balancer for HTTP traffic basically, right? So you can create some kind of external nginx or like elastic load balancer or any universal load balancer. So this is one for production and one for non-production. If you want to connect this API manager, you can use the API auto discovery or API proxy, whatever you like, you can use that basically, right? So yeah, then you can apply the policies in like so whatever policy you want, or like JWT validation policy, client ID enforcement, everything can be created, right? This is just a simple architecture you can use, right? Any question on this architecture? It's very simple architecture basically. So what are the things you need to consider? You have a load for HTTP traffic, you need an external load balancer. You can decide whether you need two or one. So there can be private load balancer, there can be like there can be a public load balancer. You can decide on that. Then like for like you can just register all the server to your Anypoint platform in runtime manager. Then you can cluster them, right? Then like if you want to enable, if you want to connect the API manager for applying policies, and like if you want to use the API gateway, in such case you can use the API auto discovery and the proxy. I already discussed this concept, right? So that's how we do it, right? So that is our typical architecture looks like. If you want to configure this on your AWS, right, then again like you can have a EC2 instances, right, where you can deploy Mule runtime. These are the three node cluster, right? Then we can have an application load balancer. You can use the AWS web, right? Then you have a route 53, so where you can do the domain DNS registry and like domain routing. Everything can be done in the route 53. And like if you see like here we also have a net gateway, and we have a basically we have an internet gateway, right? So anybody can tell me like generally your this Mule runtime, it's in the private subnet, and net gateway and internet gateway and all this load balancer will be in the public subnet basically within the AWS, right? Rest of the thing, the API managers, everything remains same basically. Like you have to just register your servers in the runtime manager, just create a cluster in runtime manager, then you can apply the policies, API auto discoveries and everything. Can you just, anybody heard about net gateway and internet gateway? No. Okay, so net gateway like an internet gateway. So net gateway, for example, I have a Mule application, and it has to communicate with some application outside, right, over the internet, or some Salesforce or some SaaS application basically, right? Then you need to whitelist, or we need to allow that particular like or simply you need to configure the net gateway. So with net gate, once you configure the net gateway in the public subnet, then it can allow Mule application to communicate with the external application which is available of the public internet. If you don't have a net gateway, then we cannot do that. You have to do it via. So if your application running in the private subnet and you want to communicate with the application or with the SaaS based Salesforce applications, so you can use the net gateway. Internet gateway generally used like, so from net gateway nothing can come inside, right? Only external or outbound or egress traffic is allowed. In case of internet gateway, it allow internal ingress as well as egress traffic, right? So that is where like difference between like net gateway and the internet gateway. So why we call this as a public subnet? We have an internet gateway here, right? So whenever we have an internet gateway within the subnet, that subnet will become the public subnet automatically. Okay, so this is a typical architecture if you want to set up on the AWS. Any question? No question. Okay, there are two types of clustering. So like I don't think I will able to create the clustering right now. I may have to set up something. Let me go servers. Okay. So if you create a cluster, right, you have to pick up unicast and the multicast, right? So I can just so you have to pick up unicast and the multicast basically. So what's the difference? So generally like in case of multicast, right? So like see like if there are multiple nodes in the server, they automatically detect each other basically. We don't have to explicitly provide the IP address of each and every node basically. It will automatically detect, like it will automatically discover the IP address of the nodes which is available within the cluster basically, right? In case of unicast clustering, whenever you configure the unicast clustering, you have to explicitly give the IP address of the node basically, right? You have to provide that, because if you are not enabling the multicast and like if you are not providing the correct IP address, the one server will not able to communicate with other servers like within the cluster. Generally, most of the organization go with the unicast clustering. It's more secure basically. In case of multicast, like and other thing, like for most of the organization, the multicast clustering is not enabled by default, right? You need to connect with the network team to ensure that we have a multicast clustering is enabled if you are planning to use the multicast clustering, right? In case of unicast clustering, you just have to make sure like you provide the right IP address of your nodes, then it can start communicating with each other. Okay, so clustering summary basically, node sharing state. Yeah, we use some kind of distributed shared memory, or we can use database also, which I talk about, SQL database, Postgres database. High availability, I talk about that for HTTP traffic, we need some kind of external load balancer. For like internal load balancing or internal distribution of traffic, we can make use of VM queues. Scalability, you can definitely achieve the scalability by adding the additional load. And I already mentioned, if you are adding some additional node, all the existing application on the existing node will automatically deploy to the new node. Management, you can completely manage everything from the Anypoint platform. Network requirement, as I mentioned, we need to open some port 5701, 5702 in case if you are using some kind of unicast clustering basically. Load balancing, I'd already talked about, some kind of required external solution required, some kind of load balancing like external load balancer, or like we may need some kind of NGNX load balancer, whatever, like you can talk, you can, it's depend on your organization things basically. Any question on clustering? Before I move into the server group, any question on clustering? Okay, let me move ahead. Now we will talk about the server group. See, server group is nothing like, server group is again a group of server which runs independently basically, right? But it doesn't maintain, it doesn't share any state, or it doesn't share the object store, it doesn't share in the VM queues. If you have adding the server into the server group, right, make sure like if you have a requirement of stateless, right, if you don't want to maintain any state, if you don't want to share the object store, if you don't want to share the VM queue, in that case you can go with the server group basically, right? The server are group and manage as a one single logical unit. You deploy application once and runtime deploy them to all the servers in the group. So whenever like if you have four servers, you want to add the group, you added that all the four servers into the server group, you just have to deploy the application to the server group, right? And it will automatically deploy to all the four servers. Same thing goes with the clustering also. If you have a four server in the cluster, you deploy application to the cluster, it will automatically deploy application to the four servers automatically. You don't have to go and deploy application to each and every server in case of clustering, as well as in case of server group. Here, no shared state. Each servers run independently. No concept of distributed memory grip. No shared object store in the VM queues. No automatic failover between the node. As I mentioned, in case of clustering, we can use the VM queue to distribute the traffic across the multiple node. But here, it's not like that. Best for the stateless application. The server group work best when application are stateless like REST API and simple integration where you are not using any kind of object store, VMQs, and whenever you are, or also you can handle the system by external applications like DB, JMS, Redis. In such cases, you can go with the server group. When to use this is typical architecture of server group. Like we don't have a distributed grid, right? You can see it here. So in case of like okay, yeah, in case of cluster we have a distributed shared memory, but not in case of server group. Okay, so here you can see this is typical. So you need simple horizontal scaling. You just have all REST APIs. You are not using object store VMQs. You can go with the server group. Application are stateless, right? You don't need to share queues and the session replication. You want a simple setup compared to the clustering, basically, right? Clustering sometimes can perform bit, lesser as compared to server group. Basically, server group is just a logical grouping of your server, right? Apart from that, it's doing nothing basically. Like, and also it provides liberty of like deploying directly application to server group and it deploy to all the 4 servers, right? Let's talk about the difference between clustering and server group. Basic concept, like it's a group of independent server, whereas cluster is group of server acting as a single unit, right? Shared memory in server group, no. Whereas in cluster, it can happen using distributed memory group of database. Shared object store, no. It happen in the cluster. VMQ sharing, no. It happen in the cluster. Session replication, no. It happen in cluster. High availability only can achieve for the HTTP traffic, right? Using external load balancer. In case of server group, also we need an external load balancer, right? For cluster, yeah, internal load balancing is there by using VMQs basically, right? But again, for HTTP, we need some kind of external load balancing here. Automatic failover, no. In case of cluster, we can achieve using VMQs. State, whenever you have a stateless app, server group is the best choice. Whenever you don't have a stateful app, you have to go with cluster. No inter-node synchronization. There's no synchronization between nodes basically. In case of cluster, it happens. It also shares the data. It also sync the data between the nodes. One node failure does not shift the state. Other nodes take over the automatically. As I mentioned, one node failed, then other become a primary, right? Setup complexity, simple configuration, more complex setup. Network requirement is very minimal. In case of cluster, as I mentioned, we have some kind of more complex network requirement, like opening 5701 and 5702. Like in case of if you are going with multicast clustering, you need to connect with network team to enable the multicast clustering. In case of unicast clustering, you need to configure the IP address and all those things, right? Performance overhead is very low in the server group, slight overhead due to the synchronization of the data between the nodes. Horizontal scaling only, in case horizontal scaling with the HA, that is also possible. Typical use cases, simple REST API, critical integration needing the high availability, right? So that is the difference between clustering and the server group basically. What is a domain project? It's a very important part. What is a domain project? It is also very important architecture question, you get this question in the architecture exams also, it's very important. Any domain project is not allowed on the cloud hub and runtime fabric, that it is only allowed for the on-premise or hybrid implementation. And I want to know what is a domain project. By default, it uses a default domain. Whenever you deploy the application, you might be noticed, or if you are deploying something from Anypoint Studio, you will say default domain basically, right? Right? Nobody knows the domain project. Nobody used the domain project.
Yes, Rajan.
Multiple configurations we will use that.
Okay.
So within the business group, we can use common properties in a single API developers.
Okay. But there's one of the use case where we can use this domain. One of the biggest use case, right? That is why we use the domain. Yeah, definitely sharing of the resources. That's a good thing, right? Whatever, if you have some resources need to be shared across the multiple project that deploy to the Mule runtime, you can create a domain project and you can just add that particular domain project into your application and you can start sharing the resources. But one of the use case where I use the domain project, I have a scenario. For example, So you have a Mule runtime right now. So in case of cloud up, we don't face the issue if we deploy multiple application on 8081, right? Because each application get deployed in the new instance. Basically, it's on the separate instance. But here we have a one Mule runtime on one server. Now I deploy one application on port 8081. It is already listening on port 8081. When I try to deploy a second application on port 8081, it will happen or no? It will going to happen, or it will give some port is already binded kind of error for second application.
We can deploy multiple apps, right? Because we will deploy in.
But I'm talking about the port. Once I deploy one application, I deployed on port 8081, and second application I'm deploying on the port 8081. Will I get error, or will it be successful?
Same, or we can't deploy with the same.
Yeah, we cannot do that, right? Because it's the same Mule runtime where it is already deployed on 8081. Now, if I deploy a second application on port 8081, it will give port already in use, right? Or it will give a port bind error, basically. In such cases, you use the domain project. You create a connection, HTTP connection, listener connection in the domain project, and in the application you use that connection, right? In that particular, like, you use that domain project in application 1, use that connection in application 2, use the domain project, and you use that same connection which is on 8081. That's how you can deploy a same application or deploy multiple application on the same port. You are reusing your connection from the domain project. That is one of the important use case where we use the domain project. So domain project is used create to share the resources that can be reused. So Mule can define a connector as a common resources, expose them to the deployed under the same domain, which I already talk about that, right? So like you can expose multiple services within the domain through the same port, which I already talked. Share the connection to the persistent storage, share the services between the app through well-defined interface, ensure the consistency between the apps upon any changes, because configuration is only set in the one plane, basically, right? That's generally it's very easy, like, so by default we have a default domain project. Then you can create multiple domain project, and you can define which domain project has to be shared by which application, or same domain project has to be shared by all the application. You can just decide on that. But one of the use case I describe, generally when you don't have a domain project, you have to deploy each and every application on different port. Then you have to do the settings in the load balancer, like if XYZ application deployed on port 8081, PQR application deployed on port 8082. So every time you cannot keep on adding the ports to the load balancer. You cannot update the rules in the load balancer. Better you create a domain project, create a connection with the 8081 or 8082, whatever port you want, into the domain project, and share with all the applications. So the application can use the same connection, right? Which is defined on the domain project on port 8081. Okay. Any question on domain project? Is this clear? Anypoint PCE. What does that mean? Anybody is aware of Anypoint Private Cloud Edition? What is Anypoint Private Cloud Edition? Correct. Okay. So do you know, like, you can also set up a Anypoint platform like API managers, runtime manager, everything into your own data center. That's possible, right? With Anypoint PCE. So there are there are countries where you want to make sure everything stays within your country or within your organization. No metadata, no data should go out of my data center, my country, basically. That is where you can use Anypoint PCE. So Anypoint, your control plane and your runtime plane, both into your own data center within your own country cloud, basically, right? So that is where Anypoint PCE is very useful. So Anypoint PC is like, it's kind of deployment option where, like, you can set up the Anypoint platform within your organization. You can run control plane within your organization. Like in PC, following component are hosted on premises, like runtime manager, API manager, Anypoint exchange, API designer, access management, monitoring, and logging. What is your responsibility? See, the control plane and runtime plane both has to be managed by you. right? You have to provide the infrastructure, right? Where you want to set up this Anypoint PC, you need to take up all non-functional requirement like high availability, resiliency, fault tolerance, like all those things. That is will be your responsibility. It will be not MuleSoft responsibility. They will definitely provide support and everything to install the PC within your network, within your data center. But later, the like in providing infrastructures and everything will be your responsibility. Managing the infrastructure will be your responsibility. Why use PCE? The strict data residency requirement. So you have a strict data residency requirement where you don't want to send the metadata also outside your organization. Regulatory compliance, like some country have a rules like they have to set up everything like everything within your organization, within their country only. In such cases, you cannot go with cloud-based solution. You have to go with Anypoint PCE. No internet dependency. Like for now, right now, for accessing Anypoint platform, we need some kind of internet, right? But you can set up the Anypoint platform within your organization. It can be accessed over the intranet also, right? Directly over the internet, right? Full infrastructure control. You can control the full infrastructure how you want your infrastructure. You can control that. High security isolation. So as I mentioned, Anypoint platform is a multi-tenant platform where multiple vendor is using same graphical user interface and everything. It will be dedicated to you, right? It will be completely dedicated to you. So difference between, yeah, it's everything under your control. Okay, with PC. Yeah, so there's a no limit on that part. Like it's everything under your control, basically. Like so how much, how you want to set up, how many requests you want, everything under your control, basically. Correct? Is this answer your question? Okay. Yeah. See, I've seen like 4 to 5, like so installation of PC, like it does, like So if you see, there are some countries where like they want the complete infrastructure within their organization, right? So that is where the Anypoint PC is very important, basically. Like I've seen that, basically, right? So recently there are few people also reach me out like for this help for supporting this PC, some kind of information. So like there are not much more, but there are, basically.
Very good.
So difference like between cloud, Anypoint cloud and PC. Control plane will be MuleSoft cloud, and this is the customer data center. Infrastructure management will be done by MuleSoft in case of cloud. In case of PC is customer. Compliance control, it's a shared responsibility. Like in case if you have a control plane or runtime plane, either control plane will be completely managed by Mule runtime, and runtime plane can managed by customer and or can manage by MuleSoft, depending on what kind of hosting options you are choosing. Internet requirement for Anypoint cloud is definitely required. For Anypoint PC, optional. You can use the intranet also. Maintenance is completely managed by MuleSoft, whereas PC has to be managed by customer. Okay. When to use the PC? Your organizer cannot use the public cloud control plane. Data must stay within the country or the private network. You need a full platform isolation. You don't want to choose a multi-tenant architecture, right? You need your own full platform isolation, right? In such cases, you can go with a Anypoint PCE. What is the key responsibility in the PCE? Since it is hosted on premises, the customer is responsible for completely infrastructure setup. Like MuleSoft definitely have a guidelines on that, but you are responsible for setting up the infrastructure. All Kubernetes. So we generally create a Kubernetes container within the Kubernetes container where we run this PCE. Backups, upgrades, security patching, all high availability configuration, resiliency, fault tolerance, all this non-functional requirement is the customer responsibility. What is the advantage of Anypoint PC? Like you have full data control, you have a network isolation, you have a infrastructure isolation. It can ensure the like strong compliance and regulatory requirement. Doesn't have a internet dependency. It's a high security and network isolation. You can also like provide like your own custom infrastructure, right? You have a complete ownership of the platform, like how you want, like how, what kind of governance limits and everything you want, you have a complete ownership on that. Disadvantage, it's a complex setup, it's not an easy setup, right? Lot of things needs to be done. Like if you go read the document, there are a lot of things needs to be done for setting up Anypoint PCE, because first you need to go and set up the infrastructure, then you have to set up networks, then you have to set up Kubernetes, then you have to install like Anypoint PCE on the top of that infrastructure, right? So it's a lot of things. Customer responsible for upgradation and patching and everything. Infrastructure cost can be higher depending on what you want. It's required like skilled DevOps team and infra team, network team, more operational overhead. Scaling and maintenance is also your responsibility, right? So everything is your. MuleSoft will provide the installation with some kind of guide. Okay. So this is the typical Anypoint PC architecture. So you have some kind of control plane which is running on your Kubernetes cluster, right? It can have an external load balancer and data, like some databases and everything, right? This is my complete control plane. Like you have a API, system load balancer, access manager, runtime manager, API manager, everything. Then you have a runtime plane here. So we can have a, like some kind of like a runtime plane, which is nothing like you can use clustering, server groups, whatever you want, right? So which already we discussed. Like your runtime plane is also hosted on premises basically, right? So that is what this is your data center. Within your data center, you have a control plane and runtime plane both, right? And it's completely managed by you. Okay. So let's talk about some difference between Anypoint PCE versus hybrid Mule runtime. So control plane location, it's on premises inside your data center, whereas hybrid Mule runtime is hosted in MuleSoft cloud, right? Runtime location is on premises. Your runtime plane is on premises. Internet dependency not required for control plane. It can be access internet. If you want to give internet access, it's your choice. Required to connect to the cloud control plane. Infrastructure owners fully managed by customer, and here runtime managed by the customer in the case of hybrid. Install on premise, everything you install on premise, whereas hybrid, the control plane managed by MuleSoft in the cloud. You don't have to worry about the infrastructure, you just worry about the infrastructure for runtime plane. Compliance, full control and strong compliance support, limited by the cloud control plane. Maintenance upgraded, customer responsible. Here for control plane, everything is managed by MuleSoft. Setup complexity is on the higher side, whereas it's a moderate for hybrid Mule runtime. Best for highly regulated industries, and like it is best for standard enterprise hybrid setup. Cost and operational efforts higher, infrastructure plus operational overall. It is very lower than PCE. Basically, you don't have to worry about. You just have to do the configuration. Like you don't have to worry about back underlying infrastructure or hardware. It will be taken care by MuleSoft. Okay, we're going to talk about two case study. Before that, if you have any question.
Hi, Jitendra. I actually have a question which is scenario based. So, if let's say a bank wants to move from on-prem to cloud, should they choose hybrid or maybe RTF, or should they go for PCE? Like,
See, PC is completely on premises, right? So the
Yeah.
PC is already like it's out of scope, right? If your client want to go to the cloud, right? Right,
Right.
from on mesh to the, why we have to consider PC, right? We cannot consider PC, right? Correct.
Okay, so if the like for PCE, they will have the entire infra with them as well as the metadata, right? But for hybrid, they could be okay with letting cloud hub have the metadata. So if we have a very compliance driven project, a company which is very compliance driven, then which idea should be better? And what's the
See,
consequence if somebody has my metadata? What do
See,
I lose?
metadata is just what it will going to send the monitoring data, right? Like some monitoring data, right? Or it will going to send some application name, cluster details, CPU uses, those kind of things. But your application data, whatever communication happening between your application, that data will be not sent to the cloud basically, right? That data will be stay within your network basically, right? But if you- like, but I will not for example, for country one, take the exact requirement for country one. For country one, I have a requirement basically, right? So for example, for MuleSoft, how many control plane we have? I think we have a EU control plane and we have a US control plane. We have a 2 control plane, right? So for Europe, like if I want to set up something, everything in the Europe, right? In that case, I can use the EU control plane and everything within Europe, right? So my metadata will also stay in Europe. My data will be also stay in Europe. Even I use completely cloud-based architecture, right? So there might be country for some countries, right? For example, it is not part of US or not part of Europe, basically. Some country outside Europe and US, they have a requirement where their data and metadata should not, or nothing should flow out of their country basically, right? So but still, like for example, even I've set up everything like my on premises, right? But still my metadata will either go to Europe control plane or either it will go to the US control plane, right? But still my metadata is going outside my country. In such cases, we have to choose Anypoint PCE as the option that you can set up within that particular country, right? Your control plane and your runtime plane both will be in the same country, within that country where your data should not go outside your network basically. That is where this particular option is very useful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually have another question about clustering. So, so CloudHub 2.0 has it includes a built-in HTTP load balancer that would handle, and would distribute app replicas, when using. But then, if it has its own load balancer, why does external load balancing come into play?
So you are mixing two topics, right? So CloudHub 2.0, I have never mentioned we need an external load balancer. I'm talking about the on-premises Mule runtime, right? So we have deployed your on-premises Mule runtime on, like you have set up 2 servers. You have deployed everything into your on-premises, right? So you have 2 servers within same cluster. So now definitely for CloudHub 2.0, if you are deploying a 2 replica, it already have a built-in ingress control. But I'm completely doing the setup on my on-premises. Definitely, I need an external load balancer for routing the HTTP traffic, right? So CloudHub 2.0 is completely different thing. It's a completely like your runtime. Whenever you are runtime plane in the CloudHub 2.0, then you don't need a load balancer. It already have an ingress. But now my runtime plane is on-premises basically, right here. So I'm not setting anything on the CloudHub 2.0. I'm setting everything into my on-premises. Like my total runtime plane is on premises, right? For HTTP traffic, I need an external load balancer.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I have one scenario. I've solved that also. Okay. Can anybody? I will read out. Can anybody just explain me what will be the solution for that? A financial institution required a cost-effective on-premises Mule integration solution that operate on the minimum codes and ensure the high availability, meet a strictly security and compliance requirement, no cloud deployment. That is the strict rule. The key requirement: deploy Mule runtime in a 2-node cluster for high availability, uses on-premises Anypoint runtime like secure API using client ID enforcement, deploy behind the load balancer, right? Ensuring data sharing across the node using DB-backed object store or shared storage. There are integration HTTP listener, JMS queue file use. The solution must node failover, shared state management, secure API access, low operational overhead while remaining fully on premises and comply. Any question? Anybody can tell me what I will going to use here?
I think
Well, the only full on-premise is actually PCE.
Not PC. I can. So, for example, data only. Data should not move out of your organization. PC is right answer, but here I am allowing a metadata to can move outside my organization.
Hybrid mode, where our data is available on to the
Hybrid.
local
Hybrid
machine.
is fine, but what with option basically hybrid.
Runtime is only available at the local machine, and plane control plane will be there on the cloud only. So only metadata is allowed to access.
Okay, this is the answer. So I will be using the clustering basically first of all because I want to share the state, right? So I want to ensure that the state is shared across the multiple nodes. So I want a distributed memory grid, right? So I will use the load balancer. So that is the external load balancer for HTTP traffic, and I want to apply the client ID enforcement policies and everything. So my API will connect to the to the API manager using API auto discovery, so I can apply the policies and everything basically, right? So this will fulfill my all the requirement. So I have a 2 node server with a clustering setup between them, right? So then I will just communicate with or peer my mule runtime or runtime plane with a control plane using the API auto discovery, so I can apply the policies. Anypoint monitoring and alerts can be part of that, so I can just send all the metadata. It will automatically move the metadata, right? So this is how the architecture. I have a second thing. A finance institute again required the cost-effective on-premises solution using the Mule runtime that operates on a minimal vCore, support low workloads, and ensure the high availability. Deploy the Mule runtime on the two-node HA cluster behind the load balancer, secure API using the client ID enforcement, support HTTP listener and JMS queue listener. Okay. Use external JMS broker for reliability. No data sharing required. The solution must deliver the high availability, secure, and reliable messaging while maintaining a low infrastructure cost. Again, here I can use the server group directly because I want to tell you one more difference. In case of topic, right, I cannot go with the server group. I have to go with the clustering. But in case of queue, I can go with server group. Why? Even there are Q1 so I have a queue and there are 2 listener, right? Listener 1. The message will be always delivered to one listener basically, like either listener 1 or listener 2. So whoever active or whoever, it will automatically deliver to only one, right? So in this case, I can go with the server group basically, right? This is the high level architecture looks like. So I will have multiple servers, server 1, server 2, which will be grouped, right? And then I will have a 2 load balancer for external traffic, one for prod and one for non-prod. So for application deployed to the server group, I can use the API auto discovery to peer my runtime manager or runtime plane with a control plane, so I can apply the MuleSoft policies. And I can just send metadata to monitor the APIs and to monitor the applications. This is a simple architecture, right? Yeah. Any question? Yeah. Okay, so this is what I want to discuss. So we have discussed about the customer hosted Mule runtime, like Anypoint PCE clustering and server groups, So we have talked about completely on-premises system. So I will going to share videos on that part basically, right? So yeah. So you have I have set up everything. I've just prepared some videos for that. I've set up everything as a live demo. You can see that. Okay, so as part of that, you will come to know how to set up cluster, how to set up server groups, everything. Even you can set up a cluster in the Dockers basically. That is also possible basically, right? You can do that. Any question?